Joining us now on Setting the Pace. It is the second time in the 3 months, I'd say, so that's pretty special. We got the Pacers general manager, Chad Buchanan, back on Setting the Pace. Chad, thanks so much for rejoining us.
Good to be with you guys again.
Yeah, I just got to say, I guess the first experience wasn't so bad, so he wasn't afraid, and we didn't ask too many tough questions, but maybe after this go-around, Chad will be like, okay, I need a break from getting, questioned by these guys. But I want to start things off because the draft, we talked before the draft, and so there's been a lot that's happened since then. So, before the draft was where I want to start. You guys made some trades involving draft picks. You traded 29 and 32 for the 40th pick and a first-rounder next season. And then you moved 40 for 47 in cash. I'm just kind of curious, what was the reasoning behind all those deals before the draft started?
Well, obviously we had only so many roster spots, to work with heading into draft night, and we had more picks than roster spots. So that was a very broad answer to that, while we were pretty active in trying to move some picks around. We didn't, the idea of having 3 first-round picks was great. It created a lot of, calls and activity and interest around the league. And, having that ability to have multiple picks in any draft gives you a lot of tools to work with. And if we could move one of those into the future and have a similar situation a year from now or 2 years from now, I think that was the idea. That's why we ended up doing the deal with Denver and getting a future pick in next year's draft, and gives us 2 bullets to use next summer. And moving around, moving down in the draft, we had enough guys on our board. We felt moving down 7 spots, picking up some resources that for a market like us, a team like us, can be valuable. We decided to do that, and at the end of the day, we ended up the most important pick at the end of the night is your first pick. That's where you gotta make the right selection there, because that's usually the guy that's going to have the most impact on your team. Now you can pick guys later in the draft. Obviously, we see examples of that, but the odds are going to tell you the higher you pick, the more important that pick becomes. So we wanted to make sure that pick was where we spent the majority of our time and energy on, and we feel good about Jarace and hopeful for his future with us.
And speaking of Jarace and pick 7, I mean, look, Chad, I've always been a checkers guy, but you guys were on a full display of chess. I mean, at pick 7, you trade the pick to Washington, move back 1 spot to 8. You also pick up 2 second-rounders. 2 second-rounders in the future. Did you have multiple offers on the table for pick 7, and what made that deal with Washington the best offer available?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of interest in pick 7. I think there were teams that were chasing players. Some teams were chasing one player, some were chasing different players. So we had to calculate, how far are we willing to move back, if we're willing to move back at all. And if we do move back, are there chances of that team moving into our spot, taking our guy? And so we had to do a lot of research on that and figure out how far are we comfortable moving down, and, what are we willing to give up, and take on, I guess you could say, in this case, getting a couple second-round picks to move back. And we felt comfortable that we were still going to get the player we had targeted by moving back, but it was only 1 spot that we felt was the most comfortable move for us. And at the end of the day, we ended up getting the player we wanted. Washington got the player they wanted, and both teams feel good about draft night.
I will say, for shock value purposes, making that trade and then having ESPN announce that the pick was Bilal Coulibaly, that was great podcast content for us because we were watching it live and reacting live and completely stunned when that was the pick that came in. We're like, we didn't even think Bilal Coulibaly was going to be in that range. And then the fact that we took him, we're like, what in the world? So yeah, that was pretty savvy there. But before we talk about Jarace, I kind of have 2 questions here. I wanted you to follow up on the first question I asked you about. You talked about getting cash from the Lakers and that trade with them to move back. I want to know a little bit more about what cash considerations are and how they work. And then I also want you to, after that, just kind of talk about Jarace overall, taking him 8th. Was he your guy all along? And what do you love about his game that, made you guys so enticed to take him there at 8?
Sure. Well, every fiscal year, teams are allowed to take in a certain amount of dollars and give out a certain amount of dollars in any sort of trade. So when the Lakers approached us about, interest in that pick once we acquired it, initially they had offered a certain amount of money, and, we know what that type of money can do in the draft. It can also help your just organization in other ways. And so when, the offer got up to be, such a significant number, it was something that we had to think hard about doing. And ultimately we decided, that, hey, this is going to help us in some other ways. We're not getting completely out of the draft. We're only moving down 7 spots. We just felt like, the cash considerations, how they announce it is obviously, the average fan probably doesn't know, what does that mean? How does that help a team? What does that do for, your roster, things like that. So, and we factor all that in, and ultimately at the end of the day, the offer was something that we felt was beneficial to us in a lot of ways, that we can use those, resources to help our team, and some stuff that the average fan's probably not going to know, and you're never going to see it, but our players will feel it, our staff will feel it, and ultimately it helps your organization in ways that it's hard for the average fan to, on the outside looking in, to understand and feel. So, so that was the reason why we did that move. Jarace in particular, obviously when we looked at our team last year, one of our weaknesses was our defense, and for us to be a playoff caliber team, that's where we really have to make the most strides. So going into the draft, going into the offseason, free agency, the trade market, that was a real emphasis for us, is how can we improve as a defensive, as a team defensively. And, in the draft, we felt there were a couple of guys that could help with that. And Jarace was one of those towards the top of the list. His versatility, being able to guard, different guys, different size guys, different levels of skill level guys, different, strength of guys. He's just got a lot of, versatility to guard multiple different types of players. And we just didn't have that profile player on our roster. Aaron Nesmith, did a good job for us there. He's just a little undersized to play against a lot of the bigger fours that we have to try and defend every night in our league. And Jarace gives, some exceptional length, exceptional strength. And he's just got a knack for making things happen on the defensive end. Now he's got a lot of learning. There's a learning curve in front of him, like all rookies are going to go through. And there's going to be nights where you're going to think that he's one of your worst defenders, on the team. And because he's going to gamble and he's going to get lost, and guys are going to move without the ball and expose some of that. But he's a smart player. He's a cerebral player, and he's going to learn on the fly with us. And the defensive potential for him was really attractive to us. And he's a guy who doesn't need the ball to be effective. He can really pass. Like I said, he's a really high IQ player, which our coaches really value. And in our system, that's important, because we want the ball to move. We want guys cutting, we want to play with pace. And the more guys that you have that can make a play with the ball, the harder you are to defend. And you add in the defense and that part of the offense, and he just felt like a really good fit for our team.
What I love is when you were last on our show, the end of May, you described what you're looking for in the draft, and your description fit Jarace Walker. And to end up with Jarace Walker, I think just shows spot on that you guys knew what you were looking for. You went out and you properly addressed it. And his defensive intangibles and IQ, I just feel like is something that you either kind of have it or you don't. And I think that a player like Jarace is going to be an amazing addition to the Pacers. But one thing that you also discussed on the radio a while back is the team was very aggressive, trying to trade up in the first round to select Cam Whitmore. Cam Whitmore ends up going on to be Summer League MVP, looked awesome, but obviously slid down to 20. Why do you think these teams were unwilling to move their picks before he was selected at 20 by Houston?
I think you get into the draft, and at that point you've spent, 6 months, targeting guys that you really like, that you have interest in, that fit your team. And you get closer to the draft, you get into the process of getting to know these players. They're coming through your building, your coaches are getting their eyes on them, getting their chance to work with them, you're interviewing them, and you really develop an attachment to one guy, or maybe it's 2 guys. And then in the moment of the draft, you've built up all this momentum with, your staff, your coach, your owner, and you're like, okay, we're going to get one of these guys that we've been targeting and spend all this time on. And in the moment you get a phone call, and I've experienced this with other teams I've been with. You in that moment, you become attached to a player that you think you're going to be able to draft, or a couple of players that you think you have a very good chance of drafting. And when that phone call comes to trade away that pick, and you're giving up this potential player that you, like I said, you developed this attachment to or desire to add to your team, and you're giving that away in the moment, that's hard for some teams to just turn the page after you've gotten that far down the road with a player. So I think that's a big part of why teams are reluctant to trade a pick during the draft, because they've gotten so far down the road with a player that they're excited to draft, and to walk away from it at the very, very last the 1 yard line is tough for teams to do. And I can understand that. So that's why it's hard to get into the draft as it's happening. And I'm sure there were other teams that were chasing players like we were too. And so you got teams that are fielding multiple offers, and the draft is so hard to explain the frenzy of draft night. And like you were talking about, they're announcing us drafting Bilal Coulibaly. I didn't even see our selection as it's happening because I'm on the phone, Kevin and Kelly and Ted and I are talking with other teams. We're talking with agents. We're talking with our owner. We're talking with our coach. And the draft is happening while it's just this other thing going on during the night. It sounds crazy to say, but that's the reality is the draft is happening, but you're in a whole different world as it's happening. And sometimes you're making phone calls and you're like, what pick are we at? Like, where are we at in the draft? Like, you don't know who's just selected, and you just know where you're at and where you're trying to get to and the player you're trying to get, and can you get to that player? So it's such a frenzy of the moment. You get so attached to a player that sometimes it's hard to, like I said, to walk away at the last moment.
Yeah, and I want to follow up on that real quick before I ask the next question, because I'm curious, do you think that the NBA could potentially make the draft experience maybe a 2-day thing where the picks, it's longer than a 5-minute window there for when you make your pick? And we see with the NFL, I think it's like 15 minutes or something like that per pick. And I don't know if you need that long, but it still would allow more times for trades to happen and kind of develop and have those conversations while the draft is going on, and then maybe push the second round into another day. So it feels like everything's not just crammed in like a 5-hour time frame. I'm just curious your thoughts on that real quick.
That's something we've talked about for a long time internally. And, going multiple nights, there's a lot of, good reasons to do that. I think you see the NFL has a lot of success with that. Just the product is out in front of, the world for multiple nights on, TV. But from an internal operational standpoint, having more time in between picks is very beneficial. For the first round, 5 minutes is probably okay. But, I know the draft started at 8:00 Eastern time this year.
Yeah.
And the last pick is probably sometimes it's after midnight. So are you losing viewers as the night goes on? It gets later and later. And, having it multiple nights, I think there's a lot of, good reasons to do that. And the second round, especially, you only got, just a couple of minutes in between picks, and you're trying to move around. There's much more action of picks moving around in the second round than there's in the first round. And sometimes you're trying to acquire a pick 38, and at the start of the night, the Detroit Pistons are pick 38, and you're calling them at pick 35 trying to acquire it, and they'll say, "Oh, we just traded that pick to Atlanta." So you call Atlanta, and Atlanta says, "Oh, we traded that pick to Charlotte." But before you know it, the pick's already taken. There's so much, as action is taking place, you don't know who exactly has each pick because they get moved around so much in the moment. And I think also there's benefits of each player has its own little story. And sometimes the second round players, their story just kind of gets pushed to the side because they're coming so fast, and they're still talking about the first round, and it diminishes their moment a little bit. So having it multiple nights, I think, is there's a lot of advantages to doing that, and who knows what will happen in the future. Maybe they consider doing that moving forward. But I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I would love to see them do that, and I think there could be even 3 rounds eventually once we get more talent, because the league just keeps getting fuller and fuller with talent, and we know expansion's potentially on the way as well. So, but you traded away 2 picks at 29 and 32, but you kept pick 26. You take Ben Sheppard at 26, someone that was a late riser on big boards. What was it about Sheppard's game that made it important to hang on to pick 26 instead of moving it? And was it true the Pacers had been high on him for years?
Yeah, we've liked Ben for a little while now. And I think once Coach Carlisle came on board, you as a scouting staff, you can like a player for your own individual reasons, but it may not fit your system that your coach is playing and employing. So kind of marrying up those two thoughts is important for us. And I think that's what initially attracted our scouts to Ben was his ability to play without the ball, his movement, his shooting, his just overall activity level was the way that Rick and his staff like to play offensively, especially is, we're trying not to be an isolation type team where there's a lot of ball movement, a lot of player movement. The ball is swinging up and down the court. It's swinging side to side. Guys are cutting. Guys are screening. And that's how Ben thrives. That's his game. And so I think that's what initially drew our scouts to Ben. And the more you watch him, the more his development happened from year to year. And ultimately, he had a very good combine, which was good for him. But at that point, we kind of knew that this guy would be a pretty seamless fit with how Coach Carl likes to run things. And he had a great workout for us. He really impressed us with his interview. His personality is, he's kind of an underdog. And I think those are the guys who you pick them later in the first round or the second round, guys who've had to kind of grind their way to get to a certain spot, and they weren't, handed anything. Those are the guys that are going to work, and they're going to continue to work. And that's Ben. And I think that's, why I think he's going to be a good fit with us.
I just love how eager both players were to get to work right after being drafted. So, to back up your point right over there, I think the Pacers got two great players on the court, but also off the court. But another thing that you had, mentioned before, but in the second round, there was speculation that maybe Indiana Hoosier, Trayce Jackson-Davis sliding in the draft, that you guys could select him at 47 or 55. You referenced this in a radio interview that it didn't work out because it felt like Trayce wanted a guaranteed roster spot instead of a two-way deal. Instead, you end up selecting Mojave King and Isaiah Wong. What was it about these two players that maybe made them the right picks for you guys, and why have King be a draft and stash?
Yeah, first off with Trayce, obviously terrific player, terrific human being, big fans of his game. Obviously, there's a lot of ties to Indiana, and it's something we looked very hard into. There's a lot of communication with his agent, trying to find. Sometimes both parties have got to be on the same page, and they both got to want the same thing. Sometimes you don't want to start a relationship off in a bad way that's kind of doomed from the very beginning. So we were respectful of his agent's wishes, and we want the best for him. He's going to be a great player in Golden State, and I think he's going to have a tremendous NBA career. And but it's also he looks at our roster and saw is there a great opportunity there for him, for us, and he probably sees the depth we have at the center position, felt like, hey, that's probably not the best situation for me, which I understand that. And no disrespect to the Pacers, and you got to, as a player, you got to look for what's best for you, and we totally understood that and respected that. So we end up turning in a different direction. And Mojave is you go back to the roster spot situation. We were in a crunch there, so we had to find the best candidate that was willing to continue to develop elsewhere, whether that's overseas or the G League, wherever it ends up being. We had to have that profile of person. At pick 47, it's sometimes hard to get somebody to accept that. So we had to do a lot of research on who's willing to do that. And we liked Mojave, and he's a young wing, and liked where he was kind of started to develop as the G League season went on. So he's going to be whether he ends up where he ends up this season, we don't know yet. We're still working on that, hoping the agent and our staff are working on that together. And but we'd like to see him developing, and obviously he won't be with Pacers this year, but I'm excited to see where he goes in the next year or two, and we can evaluate his development that way.
Yeah, and as we kind of tie up our conversation here about the draft, one thing I was curious about, you did bring on Oscar Tshiebwe on that other two-way deal. What do you like about Oscar and what he brings to the table? And I guess any other comments you have on the draft before we move on to the next part of our conversation here?
I mean, he's hard to not smile when you're around the guy. I mean, you bring up his name, I just instantly smile because he just lights up the room. He's got a great way about him. He's very people friendly, very people oriented, a pleaser. And we had, obviously, how can you not respect what he did at Kentucky? I mean, he's gobbled up rebounds as well as anybody in the country, and physical presence, and he got better from his time at West Virginia to each year, as he progressed. We finished up at Kentucky, and he was a guy we jumped on right the second we saw he wasn't the 6th or 58th pick this year. We were on the horn trying to get him to commit to come to us. And it was funny when he called us. He had plenty of offers. When he called us, he said, the first thing he said was, "I'm ready to come eat rebounds for you guys." So that's something that our team and teams in the NBA need. You need guys who want to chase the ball and rebound and get you extra possessions, and he brings a physicality, and excited to see how he can develop with us, because he's a little undersized for an NBA center, but he's also oversized with his strength and his ability to go get the ball too.
Chad, I gotta chime in on this. As a graduate of West Virginia, I followed Oscar through high school, and I loved this man, and I was heartbroken when he left to go to Kentucky. Seeing him work out for you guys, I started to come back a little bit. When you guys signed Oscar, I was 110% back on board to be like, that's it. It was meant to be. Like, I cannot wait to see him develop. I love that pickup, and I cannot wait for this coming year for Oscar to develop in the G League, because, oh man, he's going to work. And he has what you can't teach, and that is a man down low grabbing rebounds. And we saw it in Summer League. He was someone that was able to get to the free throw line, didn't miss a shot, was really good at what he did, finishing in the paint. And I'm just really excited about what's in store for Oscar. Fantastic pickup, I guess.
I think if you were to meet Oscar, it'd be hard to not like him. And
I think so.
Take the basketball part just as a guy. He's just a lovable, likable guy.
And one thing I love about his game too, before we close this out, is I just love that he understands his role and doesn't try to be somebody that he's not. And sometimes you have that problem with guys, especially young guys, trying to prove themselves, Chad. But it just feels like Oscar, like you said, I want to come in here and get rebounds. That's exactly what you want to hear from a guy that's had got experience in college and knows exactly who he is as a player.
Yeah, I think that's important for a young player, whether it's a high school player going to college, a college player going to the pros, is you're being picked to that program or that team because you probably have at least one thing you do really well. And when you get to that new situation, focus on that to begin with. That's your base of why you're there. And I think a mistake that young players can sometimes make is if I'm a great rebounder and I go to the next level, I think, okay, I've already can do that. Now I'm going to work on my 3-point shooting and my ball handling. And you get away from what got you to where you're at. And I think Oscar, I think you're spot on with that, Alex. He knows why he's where he's at right now. Mm-hmm. And I think he's going to continue to do that. And as he adds stuff to his game, as he gets older, that'll only make him more valuable to teams in our league.
All right. I want to transition now to the free agency period, because the first deal that we heard reported was from Shams Charania that Chris Duarte had been dealt to Sacramento. We were hanging on the edge of our seat for about a week trying to find out the details of that trade because we weren't sure what was going down, but we knew that maybe he was on the move to Sacramento. But I'm curious, what was the reasoning behind moving Duarte to Sacramento, and how did he receive the news that he was going to be dealt?
Well, to back up to your question about the delay and details on that, sometimes teams will agree to a deal early in free agency, and they want to leave the window open for making a bigger deal 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days down the road, because deals that sometimes start off as 2 teams become a 3-team trade or a 5-team trade as you start to loop in different pieces. And so that's why I think there was a delay and probably information getting out on that decision for moving Chris. But I think the reason for that is, as we looked at our roster, we started with the drafting of Ben. Obviously we have Andrew, TJ, Buddy. We signed Bruce Brown. You got Benendict Mathurin. You're probably going to move Aaron Nesmith at 3. We just started to get really crowded at the wing spot. And so we wanted to give, him an opportunity out of respect to him to have a better, platform to play somewhere. And Sacramento has shown interest in the past in Chris and continued to show interest at the draft. And ultimately, as we looked at our roster, you just can't play 15 guys. And, Chris was obviously showed that when he's healthy, he's a good player. And we ultimately decided, hey, we want to clear up the logjam a little bit at the wing position. And, that's why we ended up moving Chris. And Chris was, when we communicated it to him, we were in touch with his agent all along that this was a possibility. So he was not caught off guard by it, because we communicated that ahead of time. And he was respectful. He appreciated his time with the Pacers, and he understood the reason for the move. And his agent helped communicate that as well all along. So I think it was, Chris he's a great man, and we wish him the best. And I think he sees good opportunity, gets to play with Domas again. They had good synergy together, and hopefully he plays well for them in Sacramento.
And I think there isn't going to be a Pacer fan out there that's not going to be rooting for Chris Duarte moving forward. We're all excited for him. And yeah, gives him a bigger opportunity. But in the process, you pick up 2 second-round picks in the Duarte deal and then use 2 other second-round picks to acquire Obi Toppin. It feels like for about 2 years now, I've been hoping the Pacers would make a call for Obi Toppin. How long has the front office coveted Obi Toppin, and what is it about his game that you like best? But I also got to know this. At the end of the season, Obi Toppin played some of his best basketball against the Pacers. Was there ever a moment where you, KP, or anyone thinking, I think we got to place a call this offseason?
He definitely put a hurting on us many nights over the last 2 years. But I think he's a guy, along with some other young fours that we've been tracking for a couple of years, because it's been a hole in our roster. And, those guys are very, very difficult to acquire. And I think, the situation came up, that with Obi, with his situation with New York, and opportunity there maybe wasn't what he had hoped. And, we could provide a good opportunity for him. So I think it was a cooperation, with all parties of trying to find, a fair deal to get him to a place where he had a good opportunity to play and maybe grow and blossom a little bit. And he's obviously a guy that's, very high draft pick and has been with a very good team in New York. They were an excellent team this year. And, I think he's hoping for more of an opportunity, more of a role, and he's going to have the opportunity to earn that with us this year. And I think should have a very, very competitive training camp overall, but the power forward spot is, pretty wide open. I think Obi's, got a great chance to secure some minutes there and show us what he can do.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question is you look at drafting Jarace Walker 8th overall, then you go trade for Obi Toppin. Based on what we saw last year with Benendict Mathurin coming off the bench, even though he was a 6th overall pick, I think some people are speculating that Jarace Walker will be coming off the bench and Obi will be starting. But I'm curious, is there expectations for who's going to start at the 4, or is that something that's going to be, like you said, a training camp battle and those guys are going to have to earn those minutes?
I think it's a training camp battle. I don't think we haven't promised anybody any starting position. I think there's probably a decent chance that Tyrese starts for us. And probably Miles will have a chance to start. But, other than that, it's going to be a very competitive camp. And we want that. We want, guys to earn their playing time and earn their minutes, earn their starting roles. And I think you're going to see a lot of competition at really every position. I think we're a team that has a star in Tyrese, and we got a lot of other guys that could maybe blossom into one. I think we have one for sure, and hopefully that we can have 1 or 2 or however many others turn into that, but they may not too. We don't know, but we have a lot of guys with that potential to take another leap, and really all across the board, almost every position we have that. So training camp should be very, very intense. A lot of guys trying to prove that they belong. I mean, at the power forward position, Jordan Nwora has an immense amount of offensive talent, and he had a great summer. He's in great shape. He was in Vegas longer than any other of our players who were not playing in the summer league, supported his teammates, and he's had a great summer as well. So Jarace and Obi and Jordan, those guys are going to be going at each other for training camp. And you need everybody at the end of the day. For 82 games, you need 15 guys. At some point, everybody's name gets called, and we just didn't have enough of those 6'7", 6'8" guys on our roster. And the more of those you can get, the more versatility you have of those types of players, the better off you're going to be in the modern NBA.
I cannot wait for the competition, because competition brings out the best in everybody, and I just feel like the Pacers are deeper at each position than in recent memory. But, you talk about wanting to address defense earlier. One of the players that you do that with, your first signing of the offseason, you come to an agreement with Bruce Brown. What made him the #1 target for the Pacers? And maybe what was the reasoning behind the 2-year deal with a team option for year 2? Because I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Well, Bruce had a lot of suitors. I mean, he's coming off a championship run where he was a big part of that team in Denver, and showed that he can adapt to really any role he's in. He was playing some power forward in Brooklyn, and In Denver, he's playing some point guard at times. He can play just all over the floor. He can guard different positions. He can play different positions offensively. So what team wouldn't want a guy like that? He's entering the prime of his career. He's durable. He's a winner. And so there was a big market for him, as you can imagine. But the thing that attracted us most of him, before I talk about his contract, is the fact that this guy, he's a winner. And he's coming off a championship run. He's shown that he can defend a lot of different types of players, which go back to the defensive emphasis of our personnel decisions. And we just saw a guy that would fit really well with what we had. I think him and Tyrese are a nice balance, because, if we're playing a team that's got a good backcourt player and the other guy is maybe more of a role player, we can put Tyrese on the role player and Ben can guard, or Bruce can guard the other team's best backcourt player. So it takes some heat off of Tyrese defensively in the backcourt, and just his ability to provide some toughness and grit and winning qualities was what really attracted us to him as a player. And the contract situation, like I go back to, he had a lot of opportunities with other teams that maybe didn't have the ability to offer anything more than a certain contract, where we had, a lot of cap room to spend. We had to get the salary floor and the new CBA rules. That's, there's some, not penalties, but there's some things that you lose out on by not getting the salary floor. And so we felt, hey, here's a guy. We didn't see anybody else in free agency that we wanted to, we felt was the fit for what we were looking for, that we wanted to spend money on. So we said, hey, let's go, above probably, a little higher number than his market might be, and see if he'll take, maybe a shorter term deal with a bigger number. And he was open to it. He spoke with Tyrese once free agency started, and they hit it off, I think, in their conversation, and just seemed like a good fit. And I think he's going to bring an element to our team that maybe we lacked a little bit last year, with the grit and the defensive mindset, and just the kind of the bulldog mentality that we were kind of missing last year at times.
Yeah, I've always been go ahead, Facci. Yeah,
I was just gonna say, I think it might have been safe to say that he might have been the most coveted free agent in this class, due to the amount of teams that could have been involved, like compared to maybe a max player where you're only going to have 2 offers. It felt like just about every team wanted Bruce Brown, and the Pacers were in that spot to be able to outbid those teams. So I thought that was an awesome signing by being able to utilize the flexibility that we had.
Yeah, he was a type of guy, like I said, any team could fit him into their roster. He's not a guy who can only fit with this style of play, or this style of backcourt teammate, or this coach. I mean, all 30 teams can look at Bruce Brown and say, I could use that guy. Like, I could see him helping our team, and hopefully he helps us next year.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what he does with this team. I think that he's a seamless fit, and he wants to play fast too. It'll be a little bit different than what Denver did, but I'm just glad that we have someone that likes country music, the cowboy hats and all that stuff. It's going to be a different dynamic than what we're used to. But, we talk about Bruce Brown being a highly coveted free agent, but I was listening to JJ Redick's latest podcast, and they were talking about how free agency has just kind of lost some of those star players in it because of how things are structured. And now you're seeing a lot of players ink those long-term deals with their current team, but then asking for a trade. I'm kind of curious, from your perspective as a general manager, how difficult is it to, approach free agency knowing that the bigger names out there, even if you have the money to go and get them, they're not really leaving and entering free agency like they once were. So I'm just kind of curious, from your perspective, how do you guys approach that, knowing that the star players aren't always there, and you haven't really been a team that's had a lot of cap space before, but the last couple of years you have been operating with that. So just curious what the benefits of having cap space versus not having cap space and that kind of thing.
I think even moving forward, there's a good chance there's even less high-level free agents on the market because of the new, loosened, restrictions on extensions for players. And I think you're seeing a lot of guys just, hey, take the sure thing. Hey, I've been offered an extension. I've got to take it. I don't want to risk going into the off season. There's injury risk, there's drop of play risk, whatever it might be. So I think we've tried to adapt to that. And, when we do have cap room, if it's not a free agent, we're trying to maximize with maybe a trade, and trying to find, can we use our cap room to, get a undervalued player in a trade, or can we get a pick in a trade? And that's just, we're just never going to be a team that probably a top level free agent that does come on the market is going to be targeting us right now anyways. Now I think there's potential that if you put in place a team that looks like, hey, that team is going somewhere, they're one player away, that they need this particular position, which is that maybe that star player's position. And I know this player on the team. I've played with this guy in the summer. I've played with him in USA basketball. I've played for Coach Carlisle, whatever it might be, and there's some sort of connection. I wouldn't say it's impossible that a high-level free agent could choose a small market if they feel like the opportunity is there to win a championship, because that's what those high-level free agents, they're championship caliber players, and they're trying to find the best opportunity to win a championship. And if they see opportunity, whether it's in Miami or if it's in Anchorage, Alaska, I mean, they're going to go where there's a chance to win a ring. And so it's our job to try to put the situation in place where if a free agent does come on the market, that we look attractive enough for them to consider us. But in the meantime, we've got to draft well, we've got to trade well, and we've got to develop well. I mean, those are the three things we talk about all the time, from our roster standpoint. Those are the three things that we got to be great at, because that's where we build a team that's, going to be successful. And doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take some time. We're trying to take the next step, next year, but we feel like we're on a good path. We just can't just sit there. You got to keep moving. You got to try to continue to grow and improve.
Yeah, we talked about a few moves, some real big moves, but the biggest move of the offseason was extending Tyrese Haliburton. There was a move that last time when he came on here, we said, please, Chad, do whatever you got to do, get the deal done. But how special is it to have Tyrese on and off the floor? And what are your expectations for him in this new role as the face of the franchise? Because we wondered, could he be a leader last year? Oh, he led. He took the step forward. He became an all-star. What do you expect next, for Tyrese in that role, as now you are a max player for this team?
Yeah, it's funny. KP and I were just talking today about Tyrese and his future, and different things involving his future and his growth with us. And I think the one thing you can go back to with Tyrese when you talk about off the floor, on the floor, just the core of him as a human being, is it goes back to his mom and dad. And he's just got such a phenomenal base of morals and character and education, and just a genuine, caring factor to him for other people. And that's, his mom and dad are like two of the most special parents I've met in my time in the NBA. And I feel like they're the type of, people that you'd want your kids to be around. You'd want Tyrese to coach your son or your daughter. When Maddie grows up, you'd want Maddie in Tyrese's AU program, because you're like, that guy's setting a great example for all the girls, and and all the boys that he's around. And so when you have that foundation to work with, whether you're an athlete or you're a businessman or you're a father or you're whatever you are, when you have that foundation, you have the potential to be very good and very special at what you're doing, and building something around him. So, our expectations for Tyrese is this is, a team that's built around his, his character and his talent and his ability. And we've got to put pieces around him that help him thrive. And he's the type of guy, I think you could put you, Alex, and me out there, and we could go play 4-on-4, and the three of us are going to look like twice the player we probably are, just because he's the one making us look good. So that's a very special quality for a player to have, and to have, a young guy, in the fold for us moving forward. He's just really changed so much of this organization and so much of our outlook. And, we've got some players around him that, he makes better every day, and he makes our coaches better every day. And we just got to, help him, continue to develop as a leader and as a player.
Hey, Chad, I still got a little bit left in the tank, and I know Tyrese can get it out of me. I know he could. So I trust him. But, what did it truly mean to you guys, the fan base, everybody, to be able to ink Tyrese that 5-year extension, knowing he's going to be here long-term, the cornerstone of this team? Because Pacer fans, we were holding our breath a little bit over the last few years. Hey, who's going to be our guy long-term? Having Tyrese here, I told Alex, we talked about it, I think it was one of the biggest days in franchise history, getting that deal done. Do you disagree in any way?
I mean, this will be my 7th season. That's by far the biggest, decision and thing that we've done since I've been an Indiana Pacer, and it's probably the favorite thing that I've done since I've been here is being able to reward somebody like that with that type of responsibility and contract. And I think it's something we've got to continue as a team, as a front office, as a staff, to build around him appropriately. We can't just say, hey, we got Tyrese locked up, let's go sit on the beach for the next 3 years. That's the core, one of our core pieces locked up. We got to continue to add to him, and we can't be content with, hey, we have one star level player here and we're good and we're going to be competitive. And that's not what our ownership wants. That's not what our front office wants, not what our staff wants, not what our fans want. So we've got to continue to, like I said, make steps, continue to climb the ladder. But being able to, I think us as a front office and from ownership to be able to reward somebody with that type of character and family and what they're about, it felt really good. And I think everybody involved with that decision, Tyrese, from the day he got here, embraced the community, embraced the Pacers, embraced his coaching staff, his teammates. He's all in, and he's 10 toes in with us. We're 10 toes in with him. And I think it's on both of us, both sides, to have a partnership moving forward that we can continue to be in that same realm.
Yeah, I'll say that press conference when he was talking about his family and just like what it means to be here long term. I won't lie, as a longtime fan of this team, I did get a little teary eyed, just like, man, it feels good to finally have someone that feels like they're in your corner and fighting for the state of Indiana to be that guy. So it is pretty awesome. And he's got a great opportunity this summer with Team USA. I'm curious your guys' thoughts on what you're hoping that Tyrese gets from this experience with Team USA. And do you think it'll have any impact on how he approaches this upcoming season?
Yeah, I was just telling him the other day he left, to go to Las Vegas to get started with camp, is, to be yourself. You're a natural leader. You're a natural playmaker. You're a naturally optimistic and positive person. I'm like, go there and be yourself. Be who Tyrese is. Don't try to fit in with the others. Put your imprint on that team and, set yourself up for a long run with your future with USA Basketball, because he's got a special opportunity. A lot of those guys, almost all those guys on that team that are playing this summer, are kind of part of hopefully the next wave of USA, basketball core pieces. So I think he'll take away a lot of good things from it. I think he'll find that the FIBA game is very, very physical, which will help his development and growth. It's a very, very high IQ ball movement. It's kind of a little slower pace. Lots of teams will play a little slower pace. So you got to kind of adjust. It's a different game than the NBA game. And I think I've seen so many examples of players that are good NBA players. They go play with USA Basketball for an off season. They come back and they make a big jump with their NBA season because of that experience. And I think Tyrese has the chance to do that. I mean, he made a big jump last year, and I think there's a lot more elements to his game that can come out. And this experience playing with these players, this coaching staff, these opponents they're going to see, these crowds they're going to play at, can only help you as a player. And that, trickles down and helps the Indiana Pacers just as much as it helps Tyrese.
Yeah, it's going to be an awesome experience. I'm excited for him. I think a lot of Pacer fans still have PTSD from the Paul George broken leg incident. Just got to have all the positive vibes that Tyrese does not get hurt during this. But, if he does, he does. It's just part of what comes with it. But at the same time, you just don't want to wish it on anybody. But I want to transition now to some other players on this team and stuff that didn't necessarily happen during the offseason. So Andrew Nembhard had a great rookie season. I thought he played terrific in Summer League in the 2 games that he played. Clearly did not belong out there. You could just tell he was way too talented to be out there with younger guys that are still trying to figure themselves out and figure their game out. But I'm just kind of curious, what are you guys envisioning for Andrew Nembhard this upcoming season? Because there's been questions like, could he continue to start? Could he be the backup point guard? What's going on with McConnell? And there's just so much going on right now. So I'm curious, what do you guys envision for Andrew Nembhard this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think there was a point I don't know if it was the first game or the beginning of the second game in Summer League where Tyrese turned to us and said, you need to send him home. He needs to go home. Like he doesn't belong here. So he did play fantastic out there. I think you saw some growth in his confidence level. His composure has always been a strength of his, but he just played with a little more assertiveness, a little more swagger, a little more, hey, I'm the best player out here kind of mindset. So, when we drafted Andrew, I think the thought was he would be a third point guard. He developed, learn from TJ, learn from Tyrese. And as we got into the training camp, it became obviously like, hey, it's going to be hard to keep him off the floor. And our coaches moved him off the ball to the 2 spot. And he played very well for us as a rookie. He thrived, certain games, and accepted the challenge of trying to guard some really, really good players. And so he really got thrown to the wolves last year in that regard. And I think moving forward, I think you see, he has a chance to play a couple different positions. I think point guards is, his natural position that he's always played, but he's shown to us that I can play with Tyrese and I can help him take some load off of his plate some nights. And I can guard, guys that maybe, Tyrese isn't a good matchup for. But ultimately, I mean, what his ceiling is, he's probably got starting point guard potential, and that's something that, obviously we have a starting point guard on our roster that's pretty good. So and TJ McConnell is a fabulous player as well. So we've got a lot of depth at the point guard position. That's why Andrew's ability to slide off and play some 2 is helpful, because it allows, our coaches to try and maximize all 3 of those guys as best they can. But it is something that's, going to be a challenge for us, having 3 quality point guards, getting them all, the playing time they probably deserve.
Striking gold with McConnell at pick 31 was just such a blessing. It's like the gift that keeps on giving, because he's going to get better and better. And yes, he did look like the best player on the court for the Pacers in Summer League. But, what are the type of roles that you envision for veteran guards like a TJ McConnell that you mentioned, or Buddy Hield, whom we saw shift from being a starter, to then coming off of the bench for, say, the last 10 or so games of last season? What's the type of role that you see for them this year?
Well, TJ, I think starting with him last year, I think he took a serious uptick in his 3-point shooting, which is
Big time.
Had a massive, impact on his effectiveness. And I think we feel like he's one of the best backup point guards in the NBA. And I think he's shown that there's still more parts to his game that he can take a jump with. And I mean, he's a very, very capable point guard. And I think there's certain situations where maybe he could start for certain teams potentially if they needed him to. So finding, the role that's appropriate for him with our amount of depth is, like, I go back to the training camp, there's going to be a lot of competition in training camp. I'm sure TJ is not one to back down from competition, and TJ's had to fight and scratch and claw for everything in his career. So that's kind of what he's accustomed to. And I think you're going to come see him, come into training camp and say, hey, I deserve this backup point guard position. And, I also go back to, you need all 15 guys over the course of a season. TJ's point guard position, we've seen us go through a lot of different names that you probably forgot were even on our roster, trying to find, another point guard. So ultimately, you're going to need all 3 of your point guards to get through an 82-game season. And his role in the locker room, I think you guys know, he's beloved by everybody in that locker room, every coach, every staff member. So he has an impact, whether he's playing or not playing. And so I think we envision him coming in here ready to battle to earn some minutes. And I think that's only good for the health of the team when you've got that much competition, because it pushes everybody else. And then with Buddy, Buddy's got great chemistry with Tyrese. He's obviously one of the elite shooters in the NBA, has been for multiple years now. And whether that's, a starting role or coming off the bench, that's, we got to determine that as well and figure out where he best fits in with this team moving forward. And, shooting is something our coaches value, and you've seen him, he can get hot, and that's a value. 82 games, having a guy who can go get, 15 points in a quarter to keep you alive or keep you afloat is very valuable. So, and he has, real impact on the personality of our team. He's very, full of life and full of smiles and full of energy, and he talks a lot, and he's got a lot of impact on things. So, he's been a great addition to our team.
Yeah, and I will say we did a little exercise on the podcast trying to find how the rotation would shake out and try to give everybody minutes and try to make like a 10-man, 12-man rotation, whatever you want to do. And it's a tough challenge
Real
to
tough.
do. And we had a lot of listeners very upset when we didn't have McConnell in there as, the backup point guard and not getting a lot of minutes. I think Facci might have had a few for him. I had to cut him from mine because there's too many guys. It's like you're trying to find playing time for all these guys. It's going to be tough. But I think you bring up a great point saying you need all 15 players for the length of an 82-game season. And, that wasn't what we were really factoring in. It was just if everybody's healthy, here's what we're looking at. But one of the players that we saw last year, you talked about him earlier, had a really great season last year as that starting power forward. And the team really kind of turned around when he became that starting power forward, Aaron Nesmith. You bring in 2 power forwards and Obi Toppin and Jarace Walker. It feels like now his position's probably going to be shifted up to the 3 or maybe even some of the 2. So after having a good season last year, proving his value to this team, what are you wanting to see out of Aaron this season with the new and improved roster?
I think our hope for Aaron is sliding back to more of a wing position, which is his natural position, and continue to see growth with his consistency shooting the ball and his continued development, which I think we saw last year. He embraced the defensive side of the ball, which is something that we need guys willing to do that. And he likes to do the dirty work. He gives you every ounce of effort he's got, every single minute he's on the floor, which, I have a ton of respect for guys who play that way, and Aaron is that. And I feel like Aaron's one of those guys that feel like every day he's trying to prove that he's trying to make the team. His mindset is, I got to prove to myself today at practice or shoot around or this game that I belong on this team. And I think him settling into having some confidence, like, hey, you belong here. Like you've established yourself. Now let's like play with a real edge to yourself, confidence wise, and not being worried about a couple missed shots and getting down on yourself if you have a couple bad plays or make a couple mistakes, and just settling into a comfort zone of knowing like I belong. Now I need to get really, really confident with my shooting. I think that'll really make him valuable to us, because if you have a guy who has shown he can start at probably a couple different positions if you need him to, but I think he probably has a chance to he's going to be in our rotation, whether that's starting or coming off the bench, I don't know, but he'll be a part of our team this year every single night, and really liked his development from start to finish last year. And I think we want to see continued growth from him, shooting the ball especially.
I love the amount of players on this team that could start or have started before, because now it feels that we have versatility at positions. We have guys that could step up, that this isn't a different role for them, but maybe more of an expanded role. But one of the players, Benendict Mathurin, a fan favorite, someone who was absolutely full of potential and confidence, and I'm going to say it, probably the best Pacer rookie that many of us have seen in our lifetime. But in order for him to fully reach his potential, what areas do you think he has to improve upon most? Because we know he can score, but obviously there's more to the game than just scoring.
Yeah, I think he's got a couple areas that he knows he needs to show some strides in. And that's, his ability to make plays for others off the dribble. I think we've seen he can get himself to the paint. I mean, he's very powerful. He's not afraid to throw himself into there against, bigger bodies. And sometimes it's getting yourself into the paint and spraying it out to a guy looking for a 3-point shot. Or it's getting into the paint and throwing a little lob to your center for a dunk. Or it's getting into the paint and kicking it back out to your point guard. It's not always getting into the paint trying to manufacture how can I get the ball up on the rim. And I think that's the next step of his evolution with his decision making. And then, his consistency shooting the ball. I think you saw, peaks and valleys with that last year, and becoming more steady with that will be important. And then the defensive side, I come back to him. There's real opportunity for growth on that end for him. He's a very competitive guy. That's a big piece of being a good defender, is having the desire to want to compete with the guy you're defending. And it's hard to do all that at once with a young player. And I think we saw some areas of real positive, growth last year for him. And you see some areas I just talked about that are going to be important for him to take the next step, because part of it is fitting in with your teammates, being able to This can't always be about you driving to the basket. Sometimes about you driving to the basket to get somebody else's shot. You're the kamikaze. You're driving in there to give up something for yourself to get a shot for somebody else, and that's how you develop real chemistry and growth as a team. And I think Ben wants to develop in those areas. He knows that's going to take some time, but he knows that's part of his areas that he's got to emphasize and try to be better at.
Yeah, just a real quick follow up on that. I mean, not like I want to like get into like the know of everything, but was there some frustrations with the players? With Ben, I guess just being so like tunnel vision, I guess you could say, and maybe not making that extra pass when he could have, and just players getting a little frustrated that he's not passing the rock as much.
I don't think there's any more than anybody else. The course of a season, some guys are more ball movers than others. I don't think there was frustration. I think there was, hey, I see this kid's talent and I see how we can help him. And I think it was guys wanting to help him, because there's another step to Ben. There's probably 2, 3, 4 more steps to his growth. And I think his teammates see how they can help him do that. And I think that's where there's a lot of communication with them on that part of like, hey, if you do these 2 things, you're going to be a 22-point night scorer. You're going to shoot 9 free throws a game, and you're going to get 4 assists a game. Like, I think it was more trying to help him than it was frustration with him.
Right.
I think there was never any tension between guys. I mean, you play 82 games, there's going to be moments where guys are pissed at Tyrese because they didn't throw him the ball. It's hard to pinpoint it on one guy. But, players, they play that many games together. There's going to be frustration with everybody on your team at some point. But it never got to the point where it's detrimental to anybody in our team with, any friction between players at all.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. And I didn't want to like try to throw anybody under the bus. I was just kind of curious, like, it just play style. Some people might get frustrated with a certain play style, but I want to kind of talk now about the backup centers, because Daniel Ty is still on the roster, Isaiah Jackson, and Jalen Smith. Jalen Smith was brought back last year to be the starting power forward, ended up losing that spot, wasn't a great fit next to Miles, but he did play some backup center, and him and Isaiah kind of rotated a little bit while Tice was recovering from the injury. We know that he played a few weeks, but not really a part of that long-term solution. But I'm just kind of curious, now that the team is trying to get to the playoffs, you're not looking to develop as much. What are you looking for out of these 3 players? I know you've talked about the openness in terms of position battles at training camp, so I'm sure there's not clarity on who it's going to be, but what are you guys looking for out of these 3 centers backing up Miles and in terms of who wins this spot?
I think each guy brings something a little different. It's hard to say. These 2 guys are very similar in what they do. Isaiah's much more impactful defensively than he probably is offensively right now. Jalen is probably more of a skilled guy that can get you 14 to 16 points off the bench on certain nights. And Daniel brings the defense and the experience and the knowledge of the NBA game. So each guy is different, and that creates, for our coaches, some nights maybe Isaiah's a better fit for this matchup than Jalen or Daniel, or some nights, hey, we need to win this game tonight. We're going to play the veteran player tonight, Daniel. Like, there's just different matchups that probably each guy makes more sense for. But ultimately, you can't play all 4 guys. I mean, it's impossible. We've got to decide, who is going to be our backup center moving forward, and that's going to be determined on the court. It's not going to be determined by, us, evaluating from, stats and things like that. It's going to play itself out over the course of time. 2 of those guys are still way young. They're so far from their prime of their career, and to say this is who this guy is today is going to be who he is in 3, 4, 5 years is unfair to that player, because these guys all develop at their own pace, and we like all 3 guys for different reasons. And I think long term, Jalen and Isaiah, we've got to figure out who's going to rise above the other in that matchup. Daniel's a little older and maybe doesn't fit our timeline as much, but he handled his position, his role very professionally last year, and really happy with that. And I know ultimately he'd love to play, but he also sees, hey, I got 2 young guys in front of me that you're trying to help develop, and I understand that, and what I can do to help them, I'll do my best. And but how that all plays out is going to happen on the court, and it's going to be a daily battle between all those guys.
To your point on the age, Isaiah Jackson, 21 years old. Jalen Smith, 23. Oscar Tshiebwe just got drafted. He's 23 years old. So you think about the experience that Isaiah and Jalen have at their young age. They got a lot of basketball to play. So I'm very excited because I do think that the best basketball is in front of them. But do you anticipate bringing in any more players to the training camp rosters? Last year, we saw James Johnson and Langston Galloway be late additions. James Johnson ended up being huge for this team as a veteran. So many people cited that his leadership was way more valuable than anything you could see in a box score.
Yeah, well, right now we don't have the ability. We don't have a roster spot right now. We could bring in some guys to camp and compete.
Yeah.
You know, if we want to win a guy, we could do that. James was very impactful last year in our locker room. And, you know, we kind of talked a lot about him. We've got George Hill had some impact in his brief time with us as well. Their mentorship of our young players, and, you know, our players look up to those guys for help and guidance. And we also want to have some of our players, our young guys, start to take that role themselves too. You know, that's got to kind of pass that leadership torch off to some of our young guys as well. Miles has, you know, leadership qualities in our locker room as well. So we're not going to, I mean, we still have a little bit of cap room. You know, like I said, if we wanted to waive a player, technically we could, you know, and bring somebody in. But I think right now, unless something comes across the table that really feels like a no-brainer option for us, I think we're probably going to be content for a little bit here.
Gotcha. Because I was gonna follow up and ask about George Hill, James Johnson. Just kind of, I know Kevin had said these were guys that would be late, free agents to address, but it feels like there's a lot of, roster spots already filled up for a lot of teams, and I'm kind of curious if there's any chance maybe they could be back with the organization, maybe if they're not on the roster, but in maybe a different capacity with the team.
You never know on that. I mean, we haven't had those discussions yet. I think both those players still would like to continue playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they'll exhaust every option they can to find a home to play. But, George specifically has a lot of history with our team and our city. And, if there's one day that he decides, hey, I'm ready to retire and I want to stay involved with something, I'm sure we'd have discussions with him about that to see if there was a role that made sense for him. But, I think it's hard for guys to close the book on their playing career until somebody else closes it for them lots of times. So I think those guys will wait it out to see if they can find a situation where they can play. And you never know how things fight with us. I mean, we could have a trade opportunity come out of the blue tomorrow and it creates a roster spot. And one of those guys makes sense to bring in as a mentor and he's on our roster by Friday. You just never know. But right now I don't see that, on the near horizon for us.
Hey, after seeing Lance be a 3-time Pacer, George Hill make his comeback, you never say never. You just never know. But look, there really wasn't that much roster turnover from the end of last year till now compared to in years past. What is the vibe like with the group that is returning, plus the new additions that you made as they head into the season healthy? For instance, a guy like Miles Turner is healthy going into this year, and same with the rest of the group. No real significant injuries. What's the buzz like?
Yeah, I think we had as you guys know, we had really good chemistry, a great locker room last year. The personality of the team was very, very positive. And we talk about this with our players a lot is, hey, season's going to end. You guys are going to be away from each other for 4 months or so. We come back to training camp. Can we pick up where we left off with that positive vibe and that chemistry? And really, every season is a whole new story. And sometimes those characters in the story kind of go down maybe different paths. So we got to try to, because they have different situations, individual situations change from season to season, from role to shots to their contract situation. And so there's not just a given that we pick up where we left off with our chemistry. We hope we do, but we got to work with that. We got to work on that with communication with our players. Our players got to work on that internally with each other. Our coaches got to work with that with their players. And we got to keep the good vibe going because it was a very good vibe last year. And, there'll be more expectations, this year on the team, which impacts sometimes how guys play, how sometimes guys feel about the team. And so that's a new dynamic that will come into play as well. And not saying we're going to win a championship next year, but I think there's expectations that we have a better season, win-loss wise than we did last year. So that's another element that comes into play. And all this factors into your new story for this next season. And it's on all of us, like I said, within the locker room, within the staff, within the organization, to keep everybody rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, I will say, you talk about vibes. I mean, the most vibe thing I've seen all offseason was Rick Carlisle in Vegas with the sunglasses on inside the building after game one. That was just a great meme, great gif. Thank you, Rick, for providing that for us. Carlisle is hilarious. Always unexpected with him. But you talk about the goals for the season, maybe not winning a championship, but the last question for me, maybe I have another one, but the last one I'm going to promise on is, this upcoming season, what are your goals and expectation for this group of guys?
Well, I think Rick's goal is to get a sunglass deal out of that. That's why he's trying to similarly, but maybe get him to coach in those one game this year.
That would be great.
Yeah, but I think it's the question about goals for this season. I think, like, I go back to the expectation is we win 35 games last year. We want to try to make another jump. Whether that jump is to 40 to 42 wins, or if it's to 45 to 47 wins, whatever that might be, we want to feel progress. And we may win 39 games next year and feel progress. You'll know whether you have it or not. And I think we may win 40 games and feel like it was a crappy season. You just never know. Sometimes the number of wins doesn't tell the direction you're headed. And I think the development of our players is going to be important. We want to see our young guys grow and develop, and we want to see chemistry develop with our young guys. And we would like to see, like I go back to, I feel like to win in this league at a high level, you got to have multiple star level players. And I think right now, Tyrese has shown that he can be one of those stars, or is one of those stars. Who is another guy? Is that guy on our roster? There are two guys on our roster, but we need another guy that can help us. If we want to be a playoff level team, we need another guy to take a jump. And we need a guy that can be nights where Tyrese doesn't have it going, that can take over and get us to a win. And, we saw last year without Tyrese how much we struggled during that stretch when he got injured. We have more depth this year, but do we have a guy that can take that next jump to that star level? And I think that's what will determine ultimately how we get to be a playoff level team, and how we ultimately get to be a team that can compete and win in the playoffs and make a run. And there's a lot of question marks on this team. We have a lot of young players with a lot of talent, but there's a lot of unknown. I mean, there's a chance that all the guys kind of don't take a jump and we're a very average team. There's a chance that multiple guys take a jump and we win 47 games and we're in the top 6 in the playoffs. It just depends on, can guys take another jump in their development? And do we have the chemistry and vibe that where it fits together? And ultimately, a huge part of our development, our growth, is our defense. And if we're one of the worst defensive teams in the league next year, and I don't care how much growth we make as an offensive team, we're just not going to win. And that is where we want to see development. And I think Coach Carlisle would say the same thing. All of our coaches would say the same thing on that.
Here's what Alex and I were saying. If this Pacers team can be a top 15 defense, even 15 to 20, that would be a solid leap for this team, because I don't know if you pay attention to what Vegas has, but they have us at 35 wins. I think it's disrespectful. I got the sledgehammer. I'm hammering that over. I really believe the Pacers are taking a solid step forward next year. And I think the whole fan base agrees. But a little bit of coaching turnover. Ronald Nared is out. Jim Boylan in. How do you feel about the coaching staff this year? A couple of them now. We have some consistency over the last few years after a big turnover a few years ago when Carlisle and his staff came in. How do you feel about the group this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a phenomenal coaching staff. I love the chemistry, the fit, how each coach complements the other coaches. It's a really good, tight-knit group. And I think, Coach Carlisle is obviously the leader of that, but, Coach Pierce, Mike Weiner, Jenny Busick, Jim Boylan, General Pargo, Mo Baker, Isaac Jakob, all those guys, Zach Chu, there's just no ego involved with anybody on that staff. And it's Kevin and I were just talking about this today. I said, when you have highly intelligent, highly driven people with low ego, it eliminates so much conflict in your culture. And I feel that coming from our coaching staff. I feel they all respect each other. They're all willing to speak up and speak their mind. Coach Carlisle is one of the traits about Coach Carlisle that is most impressive to me is his listening skills. Is he's very curious. He wants to know what you think. He wants to know why you think the way you think, and he's never going to tell you you're wrong. He wants ideas. He wants, give me your feedback, give me your thoughts. What do you think about this? And so our coaches feel empowered to speak up. And so when you have that empowerment as a staff member, you feel engaged and some ownership in what's going on because they feel like they have a voice. And Coach Boylan obviously has a lot of experience under his belt. He's got rings on his finger, and he's been a head coach, and he's very, very defensive minded. I think that's where Coach Carlisle, values him the most, is his knowledge of modern NBA defense and trying to build us into a top, if we were a top 15 defense, I would be very, very, very happy. And I would be very surprised.
Oh yeah.
We didn't have a very good season because I think our offense is going to be very, very strong again. And if we're a top half defensive team, I think we'll have a very enjoyable season.
All right. I'm not going to ask a question, but I'm curious if you have any stories that you'd be willing to share that maybe would be fun for the listeners to know. Because last time you did go in depth a little bit more about the Benendict Mathurin draft workout story. And I know we got a lot of positive feedback from that. So wasn't sure if there was like a draft workout with maybe Jarace or Ben or something like that you wanted to elaborate on, or maybe just a story from Carlisle or Kevin or something like that.
Oh boy. Well, we have a deal going with our scouts every year. In the draft, we all put in $20, and it's scouts, front office, anybody involved in the draft. And before the draft, we all bet who's going to be the 60th pick of the draft. And if you get it right, you get the pot of money. And so this is year 6 for us. Now, a couple of years ago, we had the 60th pick, so we had to do the 59th pick. But the pot has continued to grow and grow and grow and grow. Nobody's been able to pick the last pick in the draft. So that's probably the one thing that pops in my head because it was kind of fresh because we were just talking about it the other day. But I don't know, not as many funny drafts. There was a couple of interesting interviews this year of draft prospects. We had one. This is probably the most impressive interview preparation I've ever seen from a prospect. I won't tell you who it was, but most draft prospects come into the room. Some of them are dressed up. They're all nervous for the most part, which I would be too if I'm 19 years old and I'm walking in a room of 10, 12, people, and one of them's, a Hall of Fame coach, and so you're a little nervous, but they're very, very polite, and some of them are more outgoing than others, as you can imagine. They'll have their individual personalities. But we had one come in this year, and he had a notebook, a notepad, and he had a pen in his hand. And so he put the notepad down on the desk, and we proceeded to ask him, a lot of the same questions we ask most players, get to know you kind of questions, and ask about their season, other guys, the draft, things like that. And so we're about 2/3 of the way through the interview, and I said, what's on your notepad? He said, well, I got a bunch of questions on the Pacers and a bunch of notes I've taken on you guys and your team. And so we're like, okay. And one of the questions we ask the players is, how much do you know about our team? And that gives you an insight of how much they watch the NBA and study basketball. And kind of it's a little bit of a question of how much do you love basketball? Do you know anything about a team you're interviewing with? And, some guys will say, hey, I know who Tyrese Haliburton plays for you guys. I know Miles Turner plays for you guys, whatever it might be. Well, we asked this guy, do you know anything about our team? And he rattled off all 15 of our players without looking at it. It was on his piece of paper. He rattled them off by position. He went through the depth chart by position, all 15 guys he named. He knew our defensive rating, our offensive rating. He knew what our record was without Tyrese. He knew who our free agents were. He had all this written down on his piece of paper before his interview with us. And so we said, no, what, did your agent make you do this? He said, no, I just did this for all the teams I'm interviewing for. I did all this background work on all the teams, so I was prepared for all these interviews. I'm like, wow. I'm like, this guy is like, I don't know if he's going to be able to play in our league, but I might hire this guy one day to work for us. It was the most like unique and kind of impressive combine interview I'd experienced. And I saw the guy at Summer League, and he said, he said to me, he goes, you should have taken me at 7. That's what he said to me. So I said, well, don't hold it against us. And he said, well, I'm coming for you. I'm coming for every team that passed on me. And so, but that'll be interesting to see how his career plays out. But that was a really interesting interview. Yeah.
I always love some story time with Chad. I mean, I was fresh off of reading a book to my kid, but hearing a story from you, I mean, you gotta love that. But to your point before, we've interviewed a few different players on the show, and Tyrese Haliburton's always the first name that comes to mind, but it's always interesting to hear, what did they mention after Haliburton? So that's a great point for you is, yes, there's obviously our all-star, but what else do you know? So great question over there. And man, Chad, you got the whole fan base fired up for this season coming up, that it makes August be such a downer that there is no Pacer basketball right now. But I want to thank you for coming back on. It means a lot to not just Alex and I, but also our listeners, to be able to hear how open and honest you are about this whole offseason, what goes into making the trades, the free agent signings, your expectations of the team, and all the above. So thank you very much, and hope to have you back on, sometime during the season.
I appreciate it, guys. And like I said, I think we're excited about the roster and, where things are headed, but there's going to be peaks and valleys. We talk a lot about being calm waters, not reacting to the highs and lows, and being steady and consistent every day. And, that'll be important for us this year because we got some new faces. They're going to have some, chance to have some big roles. We're going to have a lot of competition internally, and there's going to be some ups and downs. But I think at the end of the day, we've got a good core in place, and hopeful that this is a very fun team to watch and a fun team to be around. And I'm excited to get started. And I think our coaches are, and our players excited to get going. And hopefully it's come January, like I told you guys earlier, come January, we all feel the same way as we do here on August 2nd.
Yeah. Especially with the All-Star being in Indianapolis this year too. It's going to be awesome. I know there were some complications with Ticketmaster and trying to get seats for Lucas Oil's Saturday night events, but regardless, just having the NBA in our backyard basically is going to be great for this city, and I'm excited for that. And there's this, it just seems like there's a lot of positivity with this season coming into it. So I think this team's on the rise, and they're in a good spot, and we have the flexibility still for next offseason to still be players with a lot of different options. So I think that too is something that we got to give you guys credit for, with how you've went together about keeping this roster intact. You've also allowed there to be flexibility, even though you did extend Tyrese. So I think that's one thing to keep an eye on for fans too. Just adding more talent, there's going to be a chance, I think, in the offseason once again to have that flexibility.
Yep. And it's like in anything in life, you're either getting better or you're getting worse. You can't stay in the same spot. That's a danger of team building too, is you feel like you have a decent team and you just sit on it. I think we got to continue to develop players and look for opportunities to get better. And that's our jobs, and we're going to continue to do that, and trying to help this team, these fans, experience a deep playoff run, and ultimately win a championship at some point. That's what we all want, and that's what our ownership wants, and our fans want, and all of us internally want as well.
Cannot wait. The flexibility that we have moving forward just makes us able to dream past just saying, hey, it's all or nothing this year. It feels like this is truly the start of something new. So Chad, once again, thank you very much. We cannot wait to see it unfold. And hey, let me know when we're ready to hit the court, because if you still need Alex and I and Tyrese, we only need one more. We got 5 out there. I'm ready to run.
Well, I think Tyrese is going to be tied up in the Philippines and USA basketball for a while, so we'll have to wait till he gets back into the country.
I mean, if you're looking for an out of shape 31-year-old guy to be on a 2-way or on a 10-day contract towards the end of the season, I could use the paycheck. So just a call away, Chad.
Alex, I'll have you on our list. It's probably like on page 74 of our list, but you'll be on our list.
It's better than page 75. That's all I got to say.
I was going to say the same thing. All right. Hey, well, Chad, thank you so much. We really appreciate you, and can't wait to tip off.
Thanks, guys.